The sky above the city glowed an unnatural shade of purple-blue as the sun set behind the massive research complex. Emily Parker stood at the window of her laboratory, watching as the automated transport pods zipped along their designated routes, carrying passengers to their evening destinations. The year was 2057, and humanity had achieved wonders that previous generations could only dream of. Yet with each technological advancement came new challenges, new divisions, and new fears. Emily's reflection stared back at her from the glass. A woman in her early 30s with intelligent eyes and a determined expression that rarely softened, even when she was alone. As lead developer of the Comprehensive Human Assessment Protocol, CHAP for short, she carried the weight of what many considered the most important scientific achievement of the decade. CHAP wasn't just another aptitude test. It was the culmination of decades of research in cognitive science, neurobiology, and psychological profiling, designed to assess the full spectrum of human capability with absolute precision. The test was impossible to cheat, impossible to prepare for, and, according to all data, impossible to pass with a perfect score. It tested not just intelligence, but resilience, creativity, ethical reasoning, and dozens of other metrics that define the limits of human potential. Emily, the results from today's trials are ready for review. The voice of her lab's AI assistant broke her contemplation. Emily turned away from the window, moving back to her workstation where holographic data streams awaited her attention. "Show me the summary first." "Aria," she said, settling into her chair. A three-dimensional chart materialized above her desk, displaying the performance distribution of today's test subjects. As always, the curve showed what they expected, a normal distribution with outliers on both ends, but no one approaching the theoretical maximum. That was by design. CHAP was built to have no ceiling, to always push beyond even the most exceptional human capabilities. It had been 3 years since the government had mandated CHAP testing for all high-level positions. 3 years since society had begun to restructure itself around scores and percentiles. 3 years of Emily watching her creation transform from a research tool into a societal gatekeeper. "Wait," Emily said, noticing an anomaly in the data. "What's this outlier at the far right?" "That would be subject 7734. Identified as Jacob Wells." Aria responded. "His scores exceed all previous records by a significant margin." Emily's heart rate quickened. "How significant?" "He achieved 97.3% of theoretical maximum capacity across all metrics." Emily stared at the data point that shouldn't exist. Nobody had ever scored above 85% before. The test was designed to be impossible to perfect, to always remain just beyond reach. "There must be an error in the calculation," she said, more to herself than to Aria. "Run a diagnostic on the testing chamber and reprocess his results." "Diagnostic already completed," Aria replied. "No anomalies detected in testing conditions or scoring algorithms." Emily pulled up the full profile for Jacob Wells and found almost nothing. Age, 29. Occupation, unlisted. Education, no formal degrees. Previous testing, none. He had the minimum required identification to participate in the voluntary research trials, but beyond that, he was a ghost. "Where is he now?" Emily asked. "Subject 7734 is in the post-assessment holding area, as per protocol." Emily stood up quickly. "I'm going down there. Notify Dr. Lawson immediately." She moved through the pristine corridors of the Paragon Institute, her mind racing with possibilities. A glitch in the system? A sophisticated attempt at manipulation? Or had they actually found someone who could shatter the ceiling they'd built into the test? The post-assessment area was designed to be calming, soft lighting, comfortable seating, and soothing colors to help subjects decompress after the mentally taxing experience of CHAP. Emily scanned the room and spotted him immediately. Jacob Wells sat alone in the corner, a man of average height and build with dark hair that fell somewhat messily across his forehead. He wasn't particularly remarkable in appearance, which made his test results all the more confounding. He looked up as she approached, and Emily was struck by the intensity of his gaze, eyes that seemed to hold more questions than answers. "Mr. Wells," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Emily Parker, lead developer of the assessment you just completed." He took her hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Just Jacob is fine, and I know who you are. Dr. Parker. Your work on cognitive mapping is revolutionary." His voice was calm, measured, with no hint of the exhaustion that most subjects displayed after CHAP. Emily felt a slight chill. Something about him was off, though she couldn't quite place what it was. "Your results are unusual," she said, taking a seat across from him. "In fact, they're unprecedented." Jacob smiled slightly. "Is that a problem?" "It's unexpected. CHAP is designed to test the absolute limits of human capability. No one has ever scored nearly as high as you just did." "Perhaps your conception of those limits needs revision," he replied, his expression revealing nothing. Before Emily could respond, the door slid open and in walked Howard Lawson, the imposing director of the Paragon Institute. His tall frame and silver hair gave him an air of authority that he wielded like a weapon. Emily had always respected Dr. Lawson, even if she sometimes questioned the political entanglements that funded their research. "Mr. Wells," Lawson said, his voice booming in the small room, "it seems you've given us quite the surprise today." Jacob stood, matching Lawson's height. "So I've been told. We'd like to invite you to participate in some follow-up assessments." Lawson continued, "Your results warrant further investigation, and of course, you would be generously compensated for your time." Emily noticed a subtle change in Jacob's demeanor, a slight tensing of his shoulders, a barely perceptible narrowing of his eyes. "What kind of follow-up assessments?" Jacob asked. "Nothing invasive," Emily interjected, shooting Lawson a warning glance. "Just some additional cognitive tasks, and perhaps a more detailed background interview." Jacob looked between them, seeming to weigh his options. "I'll consider it. For now, though, I believe the session is complete, and I'm free to go." Lawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. We'll be in touch." As Jacob left the room, Emily felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. Something extraordinary had just happened, something that could validate or completely upend her life's work. "Have security track him discreetly," Lawson said once the door closed. "I want to know everything about this Jacob Wells by morning." "Howard, we need to be careful here," Emily cautioned. "If his results are legitimate." "If they're legitimate, then we've just discovered the most valuable human subject in the history of our research." Lawson interrupted. "And if they're not, we need to know how he manipulated our unbeatable system." Emily nodded reluctantly. "I'll start analyzing his test responses tonight." As she returned to her lab, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she had just encountered something, or someone, that would change everything. 3 days later, Emily was no closer to understanding how Jacob had achieved his impossible score. She had reviewed every millisecond of his test, every response, every physiological reading. There were no signs of cheating, no evidence of system manipulation. By all measurable metrics, Jacob Wells had simply performed at a level that their models had deemed theoretically impossible for a human being. "You look like you haven't slept," came a voice from her doorway. Emily looked up to see Lawson standing there, impeccably dressed as always, not a silver hair out of place. "I haven't," she admitted. "Not much. Anyway." Lawson entered her lab and closed the door behind him. "We found him." Emily straightened in her chair. "And?" "There's nothing," Lawson said, placing a thin file on her desk. "No educational records beyond basic schooling. No employment history in any major corporation or government entity. No significant medical records. He lives in a modest apartment on the edge of the gray zone and apparently pays for everything in cash or untraceable crypto." The gray zone was what people called the parts of the city that existed between the gleaming corporate sectors and the truly destitute areas. Neighborhoods where people lived who had either opted out of the system or never quite fit into it. That's not nothing, Emily pointed out. It's a pattern of deliberate obscurity. Precisely, Lawson agreed. No one lives completely off the grid these days unless they're hiding something. The question is, what is Jacob Wells hiding? And how does it relate to his performance on CHAP? Emily flipped through the sparse file. Has he responded to our request for follow-up testing? No, but we've scheduled a direct approach. A car is picking you up in an hour. Emily looked up, surprised. Me? Why not send the recruitment team? Because you're the creator of CHAP. If anyone can convince him to come back in, it's you. Lawson's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Besides, he seemed to respond to you better than to me. Emily wanted to protest, but knew it would be futile. Howard Lawson represented not just the Paragon Institute, but the consortium of government agencies and corporations that funded their work. What he wanted, he got. An hour later, Emily found herself in the back of an autonomous vehicle, heading toward the gray zone. The sleek, silver transport stood out starkly against the increasingly weathered buildings as they moved away from the corporate center. The gray zone wasn't dangerous, exactly, but it existed in a different world than the one Emily typically inhabited. The car stopped outside a nondescript apartment building. We'll be monitoring from here. Dr. Parker, the security officer in the front seat informed her. The subject's apartment is 5B. Emily stepped out, feeling strangely exposed in her Paragon Institute attire. The building had no automated security, just an old-fashioned door with physical locks. She found apartment 5B at the end of a dimly lit hallway and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. The door swung open, revealing Jacob. He wore simple clothes, a plain t-shirt and jeans, but somehow looked more at ease than he had at the Institute. Dr. Parker, he said, showing no surprise at finding her at his door. I was wondering when they'd send someone. May I come in? Emily asked. Jacob stepped aside, gesturing her into a small but tidy apartment. The space was minimally furnished, with few personal touches except for a wall of actual, physical books, a rare sight in 2057. You didn't respond to our messages, Emily said, remaining standing as Jacob closed the door. I've been considering my options, he replied. Please, sit. Emily took a seat on a simple couch while Jacob settled into a chair across from her. She noticed there were no screens visible in the apartment, no obvious technology beyond basic necessities. Your test results have created quite a stir, she began. We'd like to understand more about how you achieved such exceptional scores. Jacob studied her face. What would you say if I told you I didn't do anything special? That I simply responded honestly to each prompt? I'd say that's statistically impossible, Emily replied. CHAP is designed to push beyond normal human limits in at least some categories for every subject. And who defined those limits? Dr. Parker? Jacob leaned forward slightly. Who decided what is and isn't possible for a human mind? Decades of research, thousands of test subjects, and the most advanced predictive models ever created, Emily stated firmly. Jacob smiled, but there was something sad in his expression. All based on a sample of humans who grew up and developed within a very specific societal framework. Emily felt a flicker of irritation. CHAP accounts for cultural and socioeconomic variables. Does it? Or does it simply adjust the expected performance within boundaries that your models have predetermined? Jacob stood and walked to his bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of the books. Human potential isn't a fixed quantity, Dr. Parker. It's not something you can measure and categorize so neatly. Then how do you explain your performance? Emily challenged. If not through some form of manipulation or enhancement. Jacob turned to face her. Perhaps I simply developed differently, Everyone says they're different, Emily countered. The data suggests otherwise. The data reflects what you're looking for, Jacob said. Have you considered that CHAP might be limiting human potential rather than measuring it? That by creating a test that supposedly cannot be beaten, you're enforcing artificial ceilings on what people believe they can achieve? Emily stood now too, her patience wearing thin. This philosophical debate is fascinating, Mr. Wells, but it doesn't explain your results. Return to the Institute with me. Help us understand what makes you different. Jacob's expression hardened slightly. So I can become a research subject? Another data point in a system that categorizes and limits human beings? That's not... Isn't it? Jacob interrupted. What happens to people who score poorly on CHAP? Dr. Parker? What opportunities are closed to them? What doors will never open? Emily felt a wave of discomfort. It was true that CHAP had become a gatekeeper to many opportunities, but that wasn't her intention when designing it. The test is meant to identify suitable candidates for positions that require exceptional abilities, she said. It's more objective than the systems it replaced. Is it? Jacob asked softly. Or does it simply replace one form of prejudice with another? Before Emily could respond, the apartment door burst open. 3 security officers from Paragon rushed in, weapons drawn. Step away from Dr. Parker, the lead officer commanded. Jacob didn't move, his eyes locked with Emily's. I see the time for conversation is over. What are you doing? Emily demanded, turning to the security team. I didn't call for extraction. Director Lawson ordered intervention when the subject began displaying argumentative behavior. The officer replied mechanically. This is completely unnecessary, Emily protested, but the officers were already moving to flank Jacob. Mr. Wells, you'll be coming with us for further assessment, the lead officer stated. Jacob sighed, a sound of disappointment rather than fear. I had hoped for a more enlightened approach from you, Dr. Parker. What happened next occurred so quickly that Emily would later struggle to describe it coherently. Jacob moved with impossible speed and precision, disarming the first guard before the man could react. The second officer fired a tranquilizer dart that Jacob somehow dodged, the projectile embedding itself in the wall behind him. The third officer rushed forward, only to find himself redirected by his own momentum, crashing into the bookshelf. In seconds, all 3 security officers were incapacitated, and Jacob stood calmly in the center of the room, not even breathing hard. Emily stared in shock. The physical component of CHAP had indicated Jacob possessed above-average reflexes and coordination, but nothing that would explain what she'd just witnessed. What are you? She whispered. Jacob's expression was grim. I'm what happens when humanity decides to play God without understanding the consequences. He moved to a section of the wall and pressed a hidden panel, revealing a concealed compartment. From it, he removed a small bag. You should leave now, he told Emily. More of them will be coming, and I won't be here when they arrive. You can't just disappear, Emily said, finding her voice. Whatever you are, whatever you can do, it could change everything we understand about human potential. That's exactly why I need to disappear, Jacob replied. Your institute, and the powers behind it, aren't interested in expanding human potential. Dr. Parker, they're interested in controlling it, categorizing it, and exploiting it. That's not true, Emily insisted, though a part of her wondered if it was. Jacob paused at the apartment's back window, which Emily now realized led to a fire escape. If you truly believe in understanding human potential without limits, you know where to find me. I don't. Yes, you do, Jacob said. Look beyond the boundaries of your own creation. Dr. Parker, find me when you're ready to see the truth. With that, he was gone, slipping out the window and disappearing into the growing darkness. Emily stood frozen among the unconscious security officers. her mind reeling with questions that had no clear answers. Her comm unit buzzed with Lawson's voice. "Parker, what's happening? Our team isn't responding." Emily stared at the open window, making a decision that would alter the course of her life. "There was an altercation," she responded carefully. "Wells escaped. I'm going to pursue." Before Lawson could protest, she switched off her comm unit and moved toward the window. Stepping out onto the fire escape, in the distance, she could just make out a figure moving across the rooftops with inhuman grace. Emily Parker, who had spent her career defining the limits of human capability, found herself chasing after living proof that those limits might be nothing more than elaborate constructs of her own making. The pursuit led Emily deeper into the gray zone than she had ever ventured before. Buildings grew more dilapidated, streets narrower, and the gleaming technologies of the corporate sectors gave way to jury-rigged systems and improvised solutions. Still, she followed, catching glimpses of Jacob moving through the urban landscape as if he had memorized every corner and alleyway. After nearly an hour of chasing, Emily found herself standing before an abandoned subway station, its entrance partially concealed by overgrowth and neglect. Her Paragon credentials and tracking implant would make her easy to find if Lawson's security team swept the area. But something drove her forward, a need to understand what Jacob represented. The station's interior was dark, save for faint blue lights that seemed to activate as she moved deeper inside. Emily followed them, descending old escalators and passing through turnstiles long since disabled. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint hum of machinery that shouldn't exist in an abandoned station. "I'm impressed you followed me this far." Jacob's voice echoed from somewhere ahead. "Most people from your world avoid places that aren't on their approved maps." Emily moved toward the voice, emerging onto a platform that had been transformed. What had once been a simple subway station was now a sophisticated living space and laboratory. Screens displayed data streams she didn't recognize, and equipment of unfamiliar design hummed with quiet energy. Jacob stood at the center of it all, watching her reaction. "Welcome to one of the places where the real future is being built," he said, far from the constraints of corporate oversight and government regulation. Emily took in the surroundings with a mixture of awe and professional curiosity. "Who are you really? Jacob, what is all this?" A better question might be, who made me? Jacob gestured for her to follow him deeper into the repurposed station. The story begins about 15 years ago with a classified project called Renaissance. He led her to a seating area where screens displayed historical documents and technical schematics. Renaissance was a black-budget program initiated by a coalition of military and intelligence agencies. Jacob explained. Its goal was to push human development beyond natural evolution through targeted genetic modification, neurological enhancement, and specialized training from early childhood. Emily felt a chill as the implications set in. Human experimentation. On volunteers, initially, Jacob said. Parents who believed their children would benefit from advanced developmental protocols. Many were military families who trusted the system. "You were one of these children?" Emily asked, studying his face for any visible signs of enhancement. Jacob nodded. "Subject 77, batch 34, hence 7734, the ID I used at your facility." But the ethical oversight committees would never approve. "The committees weren't informed," Jacob interrupted. "Renaissance operated beyond all conventional oversight, justified by national security imperatives. The goal was to create humans capable of competing with emerging AI systems and to ensure military advantage." Emily's mind raced with questions. "The physical abilities you demonstrated, they can't be explained by genetic modification alone." "You're right," Jacob acknowledged. Renaissance employed a combination of approaches. Genetic optimization provided the foundation. Neural interface technologies enhanced learning and reflexes. Biochemical treatments improved cellular efficiency and regeneration. And from the earliest age, intensive training regimens shaped our development, He pulled up images on a nearby screen. Children in sterile environments, connected to machines, engaged in rigorous training exercises. Emily felt sick looking at them. What happened to the program? To the other children? Jacob's expression darkened. Most subjects didn't survive to adulthood. The enhancements were unstable, causing cascading system failures in the developing body and mind. Of the original 100 subjects in my cohort, I believe fewer than 10 survived past age 18. How did you survive? Adaptation, Jacob said simply. My body and mind found ways to integrate the modifications that killed others. But even among survivors, many developed severe psychological issues or became dependent on maintenance protocols controlled by the program. And you escaped? Emily asked. Jacob nodded. 5 years ago, Renaissance was being transitioned from military control to a corporate consortium, the same consortium that later funded the Paragon Institute and your CHAP system. Emily felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her. Lawson knew all this time? Not everything, Jacob clarified. Renaissance was compartmentalized. Lawson likely knows it existed, but not the details. What he does know is that enhanced humans like me represent both a validation of his theories and a threat to the control systems he's helped implement. Emily paced the room, struggling to process everything. But why take the CHAP test? Why reveal yourself? Jacob smiled without humor. Because your test is becoming the new standard for human worth. It's determining who gets opportunities, who gets resources, who gets a voice in society's future. And it's based on a fundamental misconception about human potential. He stepped closer to Emily. Your algorithms assume certain limits because they've never encountered someone like me, someone whose development occurred outside the conventional pathways. By achieving a near-perfect score, I hope to expose the flaws in the system. You could have just told me, Emily said, frustration evident in her voice. Would you have believed me? Jacob challenged. Or would you have dismissed me as another conspiracy theorist railing against the system? Emily had no answer. She likely would have dismissed him without the evidence of his test performance. The real problem isn't CHAP itself. Jacob continued more gently. It's how it's being used, to sort humans into categories, to determine their value based on metrics that serve existing power structures. Emily sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the implications. I designed CHAP to be objective, to eliminate bias in assessment. But it was built within a biased framework, Jacob pointed out. And now it's being wielded by those who benefit from maintaining artificial hierarchies. Our alert sounded from one of the screens. Jacob moved quickly to check it. Paragon security teams are sweeping the gray zone, he reported. They've established a perimeter and are moving inward. Emily stood. I should return before they realize I'm not just following standard pursuit protocols. If you go back now, things will only escalate, Jacob warned. Lawson won't stop until he has me in custody, a living specimen of enhanced humanity to study and potentially replicate. What's the alternative? Emily asked. Jacob gestured to the screens around them. Help me expose the truth about Renaissance and how CHAP is being misused. Help me show the world that human potential isn't something that can be neatly quantified and controlled. Emily hesitated. Everything she had worked for, everything she had believed in, was being challenged. Yet the evidence before her was undeniable. There are others like you? She asked. A few survivors. Yes, living in the margins, hiding their abilities, afraid of becoming lab specimens. Jacob's eyes held an intensity that seemed to peer into her soul. Your CHAP system could identify them if they ever took the test, marking them for special attention from people like Lawson. Emily made her decision. Show me everything. If what you're saying is true, then CHAP needs to be completely rethought or shut down entirely. Jacob nodded, relief evident in his expression. There's something else you should see first. He led her to another section of the station, where a secure door required both retinal and palm recognition. Beyond it lay a small medical facility with advanced equipment. Renaissance didn't stop with my generation, Jacob explained gravely. The research continued, with each new cohort building on lessons learned from previous failures. He activated a screen displaying secure files, research notes, progress reports, and medical data for newer subjects. They've refined the process, Emily murmured, scanning the technical specifications. More stable enhancements, better integration protocols. Yes, Jacob confirmed. And they're using a modified version of your cognitive mapping techniques to optimize neural enhancements. Your research has been weaponized. Dr. Parker, Emily felt as if she'd been struck. Her groundbreaking work on how the brain processes and integrates information, research she had conducted with the goal of helping people with neurological disorders, was being used to create enhanced humans under conditions that had killed dozens of children. How recent is this data? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The most recent files are from 3 months ago, Jacob replied. A new facility was established outside the city limits, operating under the cover of a neurological research center. Emily recognized the location, the Meridian Complex, supposedly dedicated to studying degenerative brain conditions. It had received massive funding from the same consortium that supported Paragon. We need to shut it down, she said firmly. Jacob looked surprised at her quick conversion. That won't be easy. The consortium has deep connections in government and law enforcement. I don't care, Emily replied, a new determination in her voice. No more children should suffer because of misused science, especially not my science. A series of alerts suddenly blared from the security systems. Jacob moved quickly to check them. Paragon Security has found one of the access tunnels, he reported. We have minutes at most. Emily thought quickly. They're tracking my implant. I need to remove it. Jacob shook his head. No time for surgery, but we can mask the signal temporarily. He moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small device. This will disrupt the tracking frequency for about 6 hours. After that, we'll need a more permanent solution. As he applied the device to Emily's arm, where her tracking implant was located, she asked, Do you have an escape route? Several, Jacob confirmed. But first, we need to secure this data. It's our leverage and our evidence. Working together, they quickly transferred the Renaissance files to portable storage devices. Jacob then initiated a security protocol that would wipe the local systems once they departed. Where will we go? Emily asked as they prepared to leave. There's a network of Renaissance survivors, Jacob explained. People who understand what's at stake. They can help us expose the truth without getting captured in the process. A distant sound of boots on concrete echoed through the tunnels. The security teams were getting closer. Ready? Jacob asked, holding out his hand. Emily took it, crossing a threshold that would forever separate her from the life she had known. Ready. Together, they disappeared into the deeper tunnels beneath the city. Just as Paragon security forces breached the outer perimeter of Jacob's hideout. The chase had begun in earnest, a race not just for their freedom, but for the truth about human potential and who controlled it. 2 weeks later, Emily sat in a safe house on the outskirts of what had once been Seattle, staring at the rain-streaked windows as she contemplated how drastically her life had changed. After escaping the underground station, Jacob had led her through a labyrinthine network of forgotten infrastructure to a temporary shelter where her tracking implant had been surgically removed. From there, they had moved between safe houses, always one step ahead of the consortium's search teams. The room was sparse but functional, filled with outdated technology that couldn't be tracked through the usual networks. Emily had spent days analyzing the Renaissance files, gradually piecing together the full horror of what had been done in the name of human advancement. The door opened, and Jacob entered, shaking water from his coat. The others have arrived. Emily stood as 3 people filed in behind him. She recognized them immediately from the files, Renaissance survivors, each with their own unique set of enhancements. Maya Chen had been part of the Neural Integration Group. her brain modified to process information at speeds that made Emily's fastest supercomputers seem sluggish by comparison. Thomas Ward's enhancements were primarily physical, giving him strength and endurance beyond normal human limits. And Diana Mercer possessed sensory enhancements that allowed her to perceive wavelengths beyond the normal human spectrum. "So you're the chap creator," Maya said, studying Emily with unnaturally perceptive eyes. "Jacob says you want to help us." "I want to stop the Renaissance program and prevent CHAP from being misused," Emily replied. "But I need to understand exactly what we're facing." Thomas dropped a heavy bag on the table. "We've compiled everything we know about current Renaissance operations, 16 facilities worldwide, approximately 200 active subjects ranging in age from 3 to 22. "Children," Emily murmured, the reality of it still horrifying. "The youngest are always the most vulnerable," Diana confirmed, her voice carrying a deep sadness. "Their bodies and minds still developing, more susceptible to catastrophic failures." Emily opened the bag, finding more storage devices and physical documents. "How did you obtain all this?" "Some of us maintained connections inside," Jacob explained. "Others developed skills that make information gathering possible even from heavily secured systems." "And you've been monitoring these facilities all this time?" Emily asked. "Why not expose them sooner?" "With what evidence?" Maya challenged. "Who would believe us? We'd be captured and studied before any investigation could begin." "But now we have you," Thomas added. "A respected scientist from within the system, with the credentials and reputation to make people listen." Emily wasn't so sure. "My reputation won't count for much now that I'm a fugitive." "You're only a fugitive because Lawson has labeled you one," Jacob pointed out. "We have evidence that can change that narrative." He activated a wall screen, displaying news reports about Emily's disappearance. The official story claimed she had been abducted by Jacob, described as a dangerous test subject who had infiltrated the Paragon Institute. "They're painting me as a victim?" Emily asked, surprised. "It's better for them than admitting you might have chosen to leave," Diana explained. "It preserves the illusion that all rational scientists remain loyal to the system." Jacob nodded. "Which gives us an advantage. If you resurface with evidence of what's really happening, many will listen, especially if we can prove the connection between Renaissance and CHAP." Emily had been piecing together that connection over the past 2 weeks. The consortium that funded Paragon had indeed been using her research in ways she never intended, creating a system that not only assessed human capability but identified potential candidates for Renaissance-style enhancement. "I've reviewed the CHAP algorithm against the Renaissance protocols," she said. "There are subtle markers in the test that would identify individuals with genetic and neurological profiles similar to successful Renaissance subjects." "Recruitment by algorithm," Maya said bitterly. "Identifying children who might survive the enhancement process." Emily nodded grimly. "But we need more than documentation. We need current evidence of active Renaissance operations to convince the public and authorities not under consortium influence." "That's why we're here," Thomas said. "We've identified a primary research facility within reach, the Meridian Complex that Jacob told you about." He brought up schematics of the facility on the screen. "Security is tight, but with your knowledge of Paragon systems and our unique abilities, we believe we can access the core research areas and extract both data and physical evidence." Emily studied the schematics, her scientific mind already identifying vulnerabilities in the security systems. "We'd need to disable their quantum encryption without triggering alerts. That's nearly impossible without administrative access." Jacob and Maya exchanged a look. "We may have a solution for that," Maya said. "One of our contacts inside Paragon has provided limited admin credentials. They won't last long once used, but they could give us a window." "Who's your contact?" Emily asked, suspicion rising. "Someone who recognized what was happening and made a moral choice." Jacob replied cryptically. "Their identity has to remain protected for now." Emily wanted to press further but recognized the need for operational security. "When do we move?" 3 days, Thomas answered. The facility will be running a skeleton crew during the annual consortium conference. Most of the senior researchers will be away presenting their sanitized findings. That gives us time to prepare, Jacob added. You'll need training. Emily, if something goes wrong, you need to be able to protect yourself. Emily had never considered herself an action hero type, but the past 2 weeks had awakened a determination she hadn't known she possessed. Teach me what I need to know. Over the next 3 days, the Renaissance survivors worked with Emily, training her in basic evasion techniques and how to operate the specialized equipment they would use during the infiltration. Though she lacked their enhancements, Emily proved a quick study, her scientific mind adapting rapidly to new challenges. On the evening before the mission, she found Jacob alone on the safe house roof, staring at the stars visible through a break in the clouds. Having second thoughts? He asked as she joined him. No, Emily replied honestly. But I am thinking about what comes after. If we succeed in exposing Renaissance, what happens to Chap? Jacob considered the question. That might depend on you. Could it be redesigned to truly measure human potential without imposing artificial limits? Perhaps, Emily said, but I'm not sure it should exist at all. Not as a tool for sorting people into categories of worth. Then what would you create instead? Emily looked up at the stars. Something that helps people understand and develop their unique potential, rather than comparing them to arbitrary standards. A tool for growth rather than judgment. Jacob smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. That sounds like something worth building. If we survive tomorrow, Emily added. We will, Jacob said with a confidence that Emily envied. Renaissance created us to overcome impossible odds. Tomorrow, we'll show them exactly what that means. As they stood together under the vast night sky, Emily realized that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the person she had been before meeting Jacob Wells, before confronting the truth about what her work had been used to accomplish, and what it might yet become. The Meridian Complex rose from the landscape like a gleaming monument to scientific progress, its curved architecture and reflective surfaces designed to project an image of transparency and healing. But Emily now knew what lay beneath that carefully constructed facade. Laboratories where children were subjected to procedures that violated every ethical principle she held dear. Their infiltration plan was elegant in its simplicity. Emily, disguised as a visiting researcher, would enter through the main reception with credentials provided by their inside contact. Once inside, she would make her way to a secondary entrance and disable the security protocols, allowing Jacob and the others to enter undetected through a maintenance tunnel. Remember, you'll have precisely 7 minutes between disabling the security zone and when the automated diagnostics engage. Maya reminded her as they made final preparations in a vehicle parked a discreet distance from the complex. Emily nodded, adjusting the subtle disguise that altered her appearance just enough to avoid immediate recognition. And if something goes wrong? Abort immediately, Jacob instructed firmly. Return to the extraction point. We can't risk you being captured. The unspoken reality hung between them. If Emily were captured, her value as a researcher would likely keep her alive, at least initially. The Renaissance survivors would face a much darker fate if discovered. Let's go, Emily said, straightening her shoulders and adopting the confident posture of someone who belonged in a high-security research facility. The walk to the main entrance felt like the longest of her life, each step carrying her deeper into danger. Yet when she presented her credentials to the security system, it processed them without hesitation. The inside contact had come through. Welcome to Meridian, Dr. Wilson. The receptionist greeted her warmly. You're a bit early for your appointment, but I can notify Dr. Hammond if you'd like. No need, Emily replied with a practiced smile. I'd actually like to review some of the facility specifications before our meeting. Is there a technical overview available? Of course. You can access that from any of the information terminals. Would you like me to show you? I can find my way. Thank you. Emily said, projecting confidence as she moved toward the inner doors. Once inside the main building, Emily navigated the corridors according to the memorized floor plan, occasionally stopping to consult a wall terminal as if confirming her route. The facility was indeed operating with minimal staff, just as their intelligence had indicated. Most of those present were focused on their immediate tasks. Paying little attention to a visiting researcher, Emily reached the secondary security control room without incident. According to their information, it would be unmanned during shift change, a small vulnerability in an otherwise airtight security system. She slipped inside, quickly locating the maintenance access terminal. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting the administrative credentials and initiating the security protocol override for Sector 7, the maintenance tunnel access point where Jacob and the others would enter. The system prompted for verification, and Emily held her breath as she completed the authentication process. Access granted, security protocols suspended for maintenance, duration 10 minutes. Better than they had hoped. Emily quickly sent the confirmation signal through the communicator disguised as a standard medical device on her wrist. Then she continued with the second phase of the plan, accessing the research database from a terminal that shouldn't be able to reach it. This was where Emily's expertise proved invaluable. The Meridian systems used architecture similar to Paragon's, with security protocols she had helped design. She knew exactly where the vulnerabilities would be, how to exploit connections between ostensibly separate networks. Within minutes, she had created a shadow access point that would allow them to extract data without triggering the usual monitoring algorithms. It wouldn't last long, perhaps 30 minutes before the system's self-diagnosis routines detected the anomaly, but it would be enough. Emily was about to leave the control room when the door slid open. A security technician stopped short, surprised to find someone inside. "Excuse me," he said, frowning. "This area is restricted to security personnel." Emily feigned embarrassment. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was looking for the observational suite for today's procedure. Dr. Hammond is expecting me, and I'm afraid I've gotten completely turned around." The technician's frown deepened. "There are no procedures scheduled in the observational suite today." Emily's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "That's strange. I received explicit instructions." She checked her communication device as if confirming details. "Oh, I see the problem. I'm scheduled for tomorrow. Not today. How embarrassing." The technician remained suspicious. "I'll need to verify your credentials. Dr. Wilson," Emily supplied. "Jennifer Wilson from the Geneva Institute." As the technician moved toward the security terminal, Emily knew she had only seconds before her disguise was compromised. She reached into her pocket, extracting a small device Jacob had given her, a localized EMP designed to temporarily disable electronic systems without leaving evidence of tampering. "Actually," she said, stepping closer to the technician, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." She activated the device, and the room's electronic systems flickered momentarily. The technician looked confused as his terminal reset itself. The verification process interrupted. "System maintenance," Emily explained smoothly. "They warned me it might happen during my visit. Perhaps you could escort me back to reception so I can reschedule properly." The technician hesitated, then nodded. "This way, please." Emily followed him from the control room, sending another coded signal to Jacob. "Complication, proceeding with alternate extraction route." They had prepared for this contingency. Instead of leaving through the main entrance, Emily would now need to reach the East Wing emergency exit, where Thomas would be waiting to extract her once the others had secured their objectives. As they walked, Emily engaged the technician in conversation about the facility's impressive design, projecting the perfect image of an interested colleague rather than an infiltrator. They had almost reached the main reception area when an alarm suddenly blared throughout the building. "Security breach in Sector 12, announced an automated voice. "All personnel implement Containment Protocol Alpha. Sector 12, the primary research wing." Jacob and the others had been discovered. The technician's hand moved to his communication device, but Emily acted first. Using the techniques Thomas had taught her, she delivered a precise strike to the nerve cluster at the base of the technician's neck. He collapsed, unconscious but unharmed. Emily dragged him into a nearby supply closet, securing the door before racing towards Sector 12. The plan had changed. If Jacob and the others had been discovered, they would need help escaping, and she might be their only hope of creating a distraction. The corridors had transformed from calm research spaces to chaotic emergency zones, with security personnel rushing toward the breach while other staff secured sensitive areas. Emily moved against the flow, using the confusion to her advantage. She reached a junction that overlooked the main research wing and saw the situation unfolding below. Jacob, Maya, and Diana were surrounded by security forces, while Thomas was nowhere to be seen, likely still at the extraction point, waiting for a signal that wouldn't come. Emily had seconds to make a decision. The Renaissance survivors could likely fight their way out, but not without casualties, and that would transform them from whistleblowers to violent criminals in the public narrative. Her eyes landed on the environmental control panel nearby. If she could trigger a facility-wide containment protocol, it would create enough confusion for them to escape without lethal force. Emily accessed the panel, using her knowledge of Paragon systems to bypass the security measures. She initiated a Level 3 biohazard alert, serious enough to trigger evacuation protocols, but not so severe that it would lock down the facility entirely. New alarms blared, and automated announcements directed all personnel to evacuation points. Below, she saw Jacob look up, somehow sensing her presence. Their eyes met briefly before he signaled to Maya and Diana. They understood immediately, using the new chaos to break away from their captors and move toward the secondary escape route they had planned. Emily made her way toward the same exit, knowing they had minutes at most before security realized the biohazard alert was false. As she rounded a corner, she collided with someone and found herself face to face with Howard Lawson. For a moment, they both froze in shock. Then recognition dawned in Lawson's eyes. "Parker," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and something darker. "So it's true. You've turned against everything we've built. What we've built is being perverted." "Howard," Emily replied, backing away slowly. "The Renaissance program, experimenting on children. This isn't what science is meant to do." Lawson's expression hardened. "You always were idealistic to a fault. Do you think humanity can compete in the coming age without enhancement? Do you think we can face what's coming if we remain limited by natural evolution? And who decides which humans get enhanced?" Emily challenged. "Who decides which children become test subjects and which ones get to live normal lives?" "The same forces that have always decided human progress," Lawson replied coldly. "Those with the vision to see what must be done, and the courage to do it." He reached for his communication device, but Emily lunged forward, knocking it from his hand. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Lawson warned. "The consortium isn't just another research group. They have influence at every level." "I know exactly what I'm interfering with," Emily replied, "and I have the evidence to expose it all." Lawson's eyes widened slightly. "You've accessed the Renaissance files." "All of them," Emily confirmed. "The failed subjects, the dead children, the plans to use CHAP to identify new candidates. By this time tomorrow, it will all be public." "They'll never let that happen," Lawson said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "It's already happening," Emily told him. "While we were creating this distraction, the data was being transmitted to journalists, oversight committees, and international human rights organizations. It wasn't entirely true. They had planned to secure the data first and then distribute it, but Lawson didn't know that. His face paled. "You've doomed us all. The consortium won't just shut down operations. They'll eliminate everyone involved to contain this." "Then come with me," Emily offered, surprising herself. Help us expose the truth. Your testimony would be invaluable." For a moment, Lawson seemed to consider it. Then his expression hardened again. "It's too late for that, Emily. Much too late." Before she could respond, the evacuation lights shifted from yellow to red. The false biohazard alert had been discovered, and the facility was now entering lockdown. Emily had seconds to escape. "Goodbye, Howard," she said. "I hope you can live with what you've helped create." She turned and ran, leaving her former mentor standing in the corridor as security doors began to close around them. Emily slipped through the final door just before it sealed, cutting off Lawson's shout behind her. The emergency exit was ahead, and through it, she could see Thomas waiting with a vehicle. Jacob, Maya, and Diana were already inside, having escaped during the chaos she had created. "Did you get it?" Emily asked as she jumped into the vehicle and Thomas accelerated away from the facility. Jacob held up a storage device. Everything. Research protocols, subject records, funding traces, enough to expose the entire operation. "And more," Diana added solemnly. "We found evidence of their next phase. They're planning to implement mandatory CHAP testing for all children by age 7, using it to identify candidates for a massive expansion of Renaissance." Emily felt physically ill. "We have to stop them." "We will," Jacob assured her, his hand finding hers as the Meridian complex disappeared behind them. "But first, we need to make sure this evidence reaches the right people who can't be controlled or silenced by the consortium." As the vehicle sped away from the facility that represented everything wrong with how her work had been misused, Emily found herself thinking about Jacob's impossible test result, the event that had started this journey. Perhaps, in the end, the most important test wasn't CHAP at all, but the moral choices made by those with the power to shape humanity's future. She had failed that test once by creating a system without fully understanding how it would be used. She wouldn't fail again. 3 months later, Emily stood before a government oversight committee, concluding her testimony about the Renaissance program and the misuse of CHAP. The evidence they had extracted from Meridian had proven irrefutable, leading to international investigations, arrests of key consortium members, and the shutdown of enhancement facilities worldwide. "And so," she said, facing the somber faces of the committee members, "I recommend not only the permanent termination of all Renaissance-derived research, but a complete reassessment of how we measure and develop human potential." "You're suggesting we abandon standardized assessment entirely?" asked Senator Reeves, who chaired the committee. "I'm suggesting we stop using such assessments to limit human beings," Emily clarified. CHAP was designed to measure capability, but it became a tool for sorting people into categories of worth, deciding who deserves opportunities and who doesn't. Some form of assessment is necessary for specialized positions, another committee member pointed out. "Yes," Emily agreed, "but not as a gateway to basic opportunity, and never as a tool to identify children for experimental enhancement. We need systems that help people discover and develop their unique potential, not ones that rank them against arbitrary standards." The hearing concluded with the committee promising to consider her recommendations as part of their final report. Emily gathered her materials, nodding to the few journalists allowed to attend the closed session. Outside the government building, Jacob waited, his appearance now altered to avoid recognition. The Renaissance survivors had become public figures of a sort, witnesses to an atrocity rather than subjects of it, but they still maintained careful anonymity for their own safety. Not all consortium members had been identified or apprehended. "How did it go?" he asked as they walked toward a nearby park, a location chosen for its lack of surveillance. "As well as could be expected," Emily replied. "The evidence is too compelling to ignore, but there are still those who believe the potential benefits outweigh the ethical concerns." "There always will be," Jacob said. "The promise of advancement without limits is seductive, especially to those in power." They found a bench overlooking a small lake, far from any listening devices. "Have you decided what you'll do next?" Jacob asked, after they had sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Emily had been considering this question for weeks. Her reputation in the scientific community had been both damaged and enhanced by recent events, condemned by some as a traitor, celebrated by others as a whistleblower. Opportunities existed, but none that felt right. "I've been developing a new framework," she said. "Not for assessment, but for development, something that helps people explore their capabilities without imposing external limits." "A tall order," Jacob commented. "Yes, but a necessary one." Emily turned to face him. "And I'll need help from people who understand both the science and the human impact. People like you and the other survivors." Jacob seemed surprised. "You want us to work with you officially?" "I want us to create something new together," Emily clarified. "Not a test, but a path, one that respects the diversity of human potential instead of trying to quantify it." Jacob considered this, looking out over the water. "It won't be easy. The consortium may have been exposed, but the thinking behind it, the desire to control and categorize human capability, that's deeply embedded in our institutions. Bêtissima." "Then we'll change the institutions," Emily said simply, "starting with a new understanding of what human potential actually means." As the sun began to set over the city, casting long shadows across the park, Emily and Jacob continued their conversation, two people who had begun as subject and scientist, become fugitives together, and now stood as collaborators in reimagining how humanity might understand itself. The perfect test had been broken by someone impossible, someone created by the very forces that sought to control human development. And in that breaking, a new possibility had emerged, not of measuring human potential, but of setting it free. In her mind, Emily could already see the framework taking shape, not CHAP 2.0, but something entirely new. A system that recognized the unique spark in each person and helped them kindle it into a flame, rather than forcing them into predetermined categories of capability. It would be her life's work, she realized. Not defining the limits of human potential, but helping to expand them, one person at a time. "Ready to begin?" Jacob asked, somehow sensing the direction of her thoughts. Emily nodded, feeling more certain than she had in years. More than ready. Together. They walked out of the park and toward an uncertain but hopeful future, one where the impossible might become possible for everyone. Not just those who had been altered by forces beyond their control. The perfect test had been broken. Now it was time to build something better in its place.